So, A History of American Civil War Literature offers the first omnibus history of a conflict that has dominated literary studies, cultural studies, and the popular imagination for over 150 years. The issues raised by and addressed in the Great Internecine Conflict from 1861 to 1865 remains relevant, mostly because folks continue to go back to the war, think about its memory, think about its legacies, as a way to think about their contemporary moment. Although the war was cataclysmic in its losses, it's also been an incredibly imaginative site for lots of different authors, lots of different readers. And over many, many years, folks have gone back to the war, thought about the war in really thoroughgoing ways. Again, as a way to really imagine what the war can teach them about their contemporary moment. So at various times, the 1890s, the 1930s, I think especially now in the 21st century, people go back and think about the war, read about the war, think about the literature of the war, read about the literature of the war, and see opportunities for seeing how far we've come with regard to slavery, race relations, issues around federalism and states' rights, again and again, looking at their historical distance from the events of 1861 to 1865 as a way to think about their own moment. Absolutely. So one of the most popular books of all time is Gone with the Wind, Margaret Mitchell's barn burner of a 1936 melodrama. That book at that moment caught fire and caught imagination, really gave folks a way to think absolutely about the war and its memory, but also about their own historical moment. I think that's a book, and in the volume we talk about this at some length, that is really obsessed with economic instability, scarcity. It's thinking obviously back to the Civil War moment, but it's also thinking about the 1930s and the Depression in some interesting ways. More to the point, when it's remembered and rewritten over time, if you take a text like William Faulkner's Absalom, Absalom, or Margaret Mitchell's Gone with the Wind, those books published in the exact same year, 1936, have radically different politics for thinking about race relations, the legacies of slavery, the legacies of the war itself. So I think that comparing literary responses to the Civil War, literary memories of the Civil War over time, gives some great access to the ways that the war can be used and misused in lots of ways to argue about what the Civil War was fought for, what its causes, what its effects have been. So I think the American Civil War encapsulates everything that's great and everything that is problematic about the history of this country. From basic tensions in the founding documents, on one hand, the promise to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, on the other, the idea of a more perfect union brought into being by we the people. Some of those basic fundamental American tensions, the war tries to work out. It certainly returns to again and again. I think more urgently, the Civil War represents the sort of apex of the contradiction of promising liberty to all, but only delivering it to some. The issues of slavery, racism, especially structural racism, that the war both tries to manage and in some ways ends up perpetuating, means that it's a conflict that people go back to again and again to think about the great promise of the United States and often its abject failures.